Wadi El Hall inscriptions. The year is 1993. Egyptologist John Coleman Darnell and his wife Deborah are walking a remote desert road in Upper Egypt, a road used by soldiers and traders for thousands of years, when they find something carved into the limestone cliff that does not belong. Not hieroglyphics, not any known Egyptian script, something older, something that turns out to be the earliest alphabet ever discovered, and most of what it says has never been translated. The road is the ancient route between Luxor and Abydos, a corridor through the Egyptian desert used by military expeditions, caravans, and travelers for millennia. The cliff walls along this road are covered in graffiti, the ancient equivalent of "I was here," left by soldiers, scribes, and merchants over thousands of years. The Darnells were conducting a systematic epigraphic survey of these minor desert roads, the kind of fieldwork considered unglamorous and largely ignored by mainstream Egyptology, when they documented two inscriptions that stopped everything. They were formally published in 2005 in the Annals of the American Schools of Oriental Research, and the announcement rippled through linguistics, Egyptology, and biblical studies like a stone dropped in still water. The inscriptions at Wadi El Hall appear to represent Proto-Sinaitic script, which is the earliest known ancestor of the alphabet, the transitional writing system that transformed Egyptian hieroglyphic signs into the first purely consonantal alphabet. That alphabet became Phoenician. Phoenician became Hebrew and Aramaic. Those became Greek. Greek became Latin. Latin became every Western language. The letters you are reading right now, the ones forming these words in your mind, descend in a direct line from marks carved into this particular cliff wall, in this particular desert gorge, by a person or persons who lived roughly 3,800 to 4,000 years ago. The Wadi El Hall inscriptions have been dated to approximately 1900 to 1800 BCE, based on associated Egyptian hieroglyphic texts carved alongside them and the archaeological context of the desert road itself. This pushed the earliest known alphabet back by several hundred years from the previously accepted date of approximately 1500 BCE, and relocated its apparent origin hundreds of miles south of where scholars had previously focused their search. The two inscriptions contain approximately 20 to 25 legible sign instances. They were carved into the cliff alongside hundreds of Egyptian hieroglyphic graffiti, suggesting the people who made them were literate individuals working within or alongside Egyptian scribal culture, but writing in a fundamentally different system. This matters enormously because it matches the long-standing hypothesis that the alphabet was invented by Semitic-speaking people, perhaps Canaanite laborers or mercenaries employed by the Egyptian state, who adapted Egyptian signs to their own language. The desert road where the inscriptions were found was used heavily by exactly these kinds of people, foreign workers and soldiers in Egyptian employ, whose native tongues were Semitic, not Egyptian. The mechanism of alphabetic invention appears to be what linguists call the acrophonic principle. You take an Egyptian hieroglyph, the sign that looks like a floor plan of a house, and instead of using it to mean house, you reassign it a phonetic value based on the first sound of the Semitic word for house. The Semitic word for house is bet. The sign becomes the letter B. This is literally where the letter B comes from. The Wadi El Hall inscriptions appear to show this principle in its earliest known moments of operation. The moment when someone looked at Egyptian picture writing and thought, what if I use these not for what they depict, but for the sounds they begin with? That thought, that single cognitive leap, eventually produced every book ever written in any Western language. Frank Moore-Cross of Harvard University, the leading scholar of Proto-Sinaitic script before his death in 2012, analyzed early photographs of the Wadi El Hall inscriptions and identified several signs he considered diagnostic of Proto-Sinaitic. But he also identified several signs he could not place within the known Proto-Sinaitic repertoire, suggesting the Wadi El Hall script may represent a phase even earlier than what researchers had cataloged, a transitional or experimental moment before the system fully crystallized. John Coleman Darnell's proposed partial translation of one inscription suggests it may include a title or designation, possibly something meaning chief of troops, though this reading has not been confirmed by other scholars and remains provisional. Verify Darnell's specific proposed reading. The location's name is itself a small marvel. Wadi el-Hol translates from Arabic as Gulch of Terror, a name given by later travelers to the remote, inhospitable desert gorge. The inscriptions were effectively invisible to modern scholarship until the Darnell's systematic survey of minor desert roads that no one else considered worth walking. Mainstream epigraphers and linguists accept the Wadi el-Hol inscriptions as an extremely early, possibly the earliest, example of Proto-Alphabetic script. The consensus holds that the invention of the alphabet was a historical event, not a myth, and that it happened somewhere in the Sinai or Egyptian desert between 1900 and 1700 BCE. The inscriptions are real, the dating is solid, the linguistic theory is well established. But here is where the conventional narrative contains an impossibility that is rarely stated plainly. If the alphabet was invented by a specific person or group, and if that moment is captured in the Wadi el-Hol inscriptions, then the inventor of the alphabet left their name in alphabetic script. The very first person to write with letters wrote something, perhaps their name, perhaps their title, perhaps a prayer, in the system they were creating, and we cannot fully read it. Some researchers have proposed that the alphabet was not a single invention, but an emergent development across multiple groups of Semitic speakers experimenting independently with Egyptian signs, which would mean there is no singular inventor and no first word. But if there was a moment, if there was a person, their voice is there on that cliff, carved in the letters that made all other writing possible, waiting in a language that literacy itself forgot how to speak. Could further surveying of Egyptian desert road networks reveal additional early proto-alphabetic inscriptions that have never been documented? Do the signs that Frank Moore Cross could not place in the known Proto-Sinaitic repertoire represent an even earlier phase of alphabetic development, a missing chapter, before the chapter we already couldn't read? And if the acrophonic principle was the key cognitive leap that changed human history, is there any way to recover the mind that made it? From the desert cliffs where the alphabet was born, we travel north and east into the highlands of modern Iran to a civilization so large and so literate that its administrative records filled warehouses. A civilization that left over 1,600 clay tablets covered in writing, and not one word of any of them has ever been read. Proto-Elamite script. The year is approximately 3200 BCE. Somewhere in the ancient city of Susa, in what is now southwestern Iran, a scribe presses a stylus into wet clay and makes marks. The marks are organized, repeated, deliberately arranged. They form a document. That document is then stored, perhaps alongside hundreds of others. 5,000 years later, the tablet survives. The scribe's words do not. No one on earth knows what they said. Proto-Elamite is the oldest undeciphered writing system on earth. It predates or is contemporary with Sumerian cuneiform, long considered the world's first writing, yet the two systems appear to have developed entirely independently. Despite over a century of scholarly work, no bilingual text has been found, no Rosetta Stone equivalent exists, and no surviving descendant language has been identified that could provide a key to decipherment. The tablets can be physically cataloged, the signs can be counted and categorized, but their meaning is completely unknown, and every attempt to unlock them has failed. The scale of the Proto-Elamite civilization is staggering. Tablets have been found across a geographic area of approximately 1 million square kilometers, stretching from Susa in the southwest to Shahri Sokhta in modern Afghanistan in the east. This makes Proto-Elamite the most geographically extensive writing system of its era, implying a degree of administrative or commercial coordination across an enormous territory that rivals or exceeds contemporary Mesopotamia. We are not talking about a small scribal enclave. We are talking about a writing system that functioned across a region larger than modern Egypt, used by a civilization sophisticated enough to maintain long-distance trade networks and proto-urban settlements of thousands of people. The script contains approximately 1,000 distinct signs, which is far more than most syllabic writing systems, but consistent with a logographic system. Though whether it is logographic, syllabic, or something else entirely remains actively debated. Radiocarbon and stratigraphic dating places the script's active use between approximately 3200 BCE and 2900 BCE, a window of roughly 300 years, after which the script appears to have simply stopped being used. There is no known transitional phase into any later writing system. It does not evolve into something readable. It does not leave descendants. It stops. French archaeological excavations at Susa, beginning in 1897, under the direction of Jacques de Morgan, produced the first identified Proto-Elamite tablets, though they were initially overshadowed by Elamite and Sumerian materials from the same sites. It was not until the mid-20th century that the full scale of the corpus began to be understood. The Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative at UCLA has now cataloged over 1,600 Proto-Elamite tablets, with new discoveries still emerging from Iranian sites as excavation continues. Verify current catalog count. In 2016, Jacob Dahl of Oxford University, the leading Proto-Elamite scholar, used multispectral imaging and three-dimensional surface scanning on tablets held in the Louvre's collection to document signs invisible to the naked eye. The project was a technical triumph. It produced richer, more detailed sign catalogs than had ever existed before. And even with this enhanced data, decipherment has not advanced beyond cataloging. Verify Dahl's specific publication and date. Many tablets appear to be numerical or accounting documents, signs that look like commodity tallies and quantity markers, but the specific commodities, the units of measurement, and any names that may appear remain entirely unknown. Unlike Sumerian cuneiform, which evolved visibly from pictographic proto-writing into abstract signs over centuries, leaving a developmental paper trail that scholars have been able to follow, Proto-Elamite appears in an already highly developed and abstract form with almost no preceding developmental phase visible in the archaeological record. Most scholars classify it as an administrative accounting system, a tool for tracking goods and transactions across the civilization's vast trade network. This interpretation is reasonable. Administrative accounting was precisely what early Mesopotamian writing was used for, and the tablet formats support this reading. But if this was purely a bookkeeping system, why does it contain approximately 1,000 distinct signs? A commodity tracking system needs dozens of symbols, perhaps a few hundred at most. Mesopotamian accounting proto-writing managed with far fewer pictographic tokens. Why would an accounting system require a vocabulary potentially 10 times that size? Some researchers have suggested the larger sign inventory indicates that Proto-Elamite encoded not just economic data, but narrative, ritual, or legal content that looks like accounting to modern eyes, but isn't. Others have noted something that has no real parallel in writing history: the abrupt disappearance of the script across an entire civilization with no transition, no evolution, no continuation. Writing systems don't usually just stop. They transform. They get replaced by something that leaves traces. Proto-Elamite left none. Could a sign inventory of 1,000 symbols represent content far beyond simple accounting? Content we haven't recognized because we're looking through the wrong interpretive lens? Did the Proto-Elamite civilization speak a language related to later Elamite, which was eventually deciphered, or something entirely different with no surviving relatives? And what does it mean that an entire writing system used across 1 million square kilometers by a civilization in active contact with Mesopotamia vanished without a single descendant text to explain what it said? With Proto-Elamite, the knowledge faded when the civilization did. No one took it. No one destroyed it. It simply fell silent over centuries. But the next text on this list had its silence forced upon it. The people who could read it were alive. They were right there, and they were taken. Rongo Rongo script. In the 1860s, the last people on Earth who could read one of humanity's most mysterious scripts were rounded up, shipped to Peru, and worked to death in guano mines. By the time anyone asked what the tablets meant, those people were gone. 26 tablets survive, scattered across museums on 4 continents. Not one living person can read them. Easter Island, known to its inhabitants as Rapa Nui, sits in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, 2,300 miles off the coast of Chile, making it the most remote inhabited island on Earth. In 1864, a Catholic missionary named Brother Eugène Hérault became the first European to document wooden tablets covered in carved glyphs in virtually every household on the island. Within the next 2 decades, catastrophe arrived in sequence. Peruvian slave raiders abducted approximately 1,500 Rapa Nui people in 1862, nearly half the island's entire population, including virtually all of the literate priestly elite. Smallpox arrived with the few survivors who were eventually repatriated. By 1877, the island's population had collapsed from an estimated 3,000 people to approximately 110. The knowledge of how to read the tablets, concentrated in a small priestly class, died with the people who held it. The 26 surviving authentic Rongo Rongo tablets are carved on driftwood, wooden boards, a chieftain's staff, and a birdman ceremonial object. The scarcity of wood on Easter Island itself is significant. The island had been almost completely deforested by the time of European contact, meaning these objects were made from precious material, suggesting the inscriptions they carry were considered worth exceptional effort and expense to preserve. The script consists of approximately 120 base glyphs with hundreds of variants, arranged in a boustrophodon pattern, which means alternating lines are read in opposite directions, with every other line rotated 180 degrees, requiring the reader to physically rotate the tablet after each line. This is not a casual or informal writing convention. It implies a practiced, trained readership. In 1886, American naval officer William Thompson photographed all then-known tablets and worked with a Rapa Nui elder named Ur Vai Iko, reportedly the last person with any claimed knowledge of Rongo Rongo. Verify elder's name. The elder would only chant from the tablets in what appeared to be ritualistic recitation, and his chanting did not clearly correspond to the glyph sequences as photographed. Whether he was reading, performing from memory, or doing something else entirely that doesn't fit either category, no one could determine. The gap between what he said and what the tablets showed has never been explained. Carbon-14 dating of the wooden tablets has produced results ranging from 1200 to 1800 CE, though some tablets were carved on driftwood far older than the carving itself, creating complications in interpretation. Easter Island's oral tradition refers to the tablets as Kohau Motu, Morongo Rongo, meaning roughly lines of script for chanting, and attributes their introduction to the island's legendary founder king, Hotu Matua, who reportedly arrived with 67 tablets already inscribed. Linguist Stephen Roger Fisher of the University of Auckland published a proposed decipherment in 1997, arguing that portions of the Santiago tablet encode a cosmogonic chant, a creation myth, matching known oral traditions. His decipherment was rejected by the majority of specialists in the field as insufficiently demonstrated. A 2021 study published in Scientific Reports reanalyzed Easter Island's settlement chronology using Bayesian statistical modeling and found that population collapse may have begun earlier than previously established, around 1500 CE, implying the literate class may have been shrinking for generations before European contact delivered the final destruction. Verified journal and specific findings. Most researchers accept Rongo Rongo as a genuine indigenous script, likely one of only a handful of times in human history that writing was invented independently from scratch. The mainstream view holds it was a priestly or chiefly knowledge system restricted to a literate elite, used for ritual, astronomical, or genealogical purposes. Decipherment is considered essentially impossible without the discovery of a bilingual text or the identification of a linguistic connection to a known language. But there is a detail that introduces a different kind of unease. Some researchers have proposed that Rongo Rongo was not independently invented, but was inspired by contact with Spanish colonists following their 1770 visit to Easter Island, when Spanish officials asked Rapa Nui leaders to sign a document of annexation. Under this theory, the islanders may have created their script in the years following that visit, having witnessed writing for the first time and recognized what it could do. If that hypothesis is correct, Rongo Rongo would represent something almost unbearable, a civilization reaching toward literacy and being annihilated before it arrived. People who saw writing, understood its power, invented their own system, and were enslaved and killed before a single generation of readers could pass the knowledge on. And if the hypothesis is wrong and Rongo Rongo is genuinely ancient, then something equally devastating is true. An independent writing tradition, developed in complete isolation, was simply erased by history in the span of about 15 years. Was Rongo Rongo independently invented over centuries, or created in living memory of its destruction? And does either answer change the weight of what was lost? The boustrophedon reading pattern is nearly identical to early Greek writing conventions, a coincidence that some researchers find too striking to dismiss entirely. And are there additional tablets in private collections, removed from Rapa Nui in the 19th century chaos, that have never been formally disclosed to scholars? From the most isolated island on Earth, we cross an ocean. Because in 1999, in the Mexican state of Veracruz, a construction worker digging fill material hit something with a shovel and accidentally uncovered the oldest writing ever found in the Western Hemisphere, Cascajal block. The Olmec built the first cities in the Americas, carved the colossal stone heads, and apparently invented writing in the Western Hemisphere roughly 900 years before the birth of Christ. The proof is a single carved stone tablet, roughly the size of a laptop computer, covered in 62 symbols that no one has ever translated. It was found in a gravel quarry, being used as road fill. The Cascajal block was discovered in 1999 during road construction near San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan in Veracruz, Mexico, when workers extracting fill material uncovered a carved serpentinite tablet of obvious antiquity. Local residents preserved it rather than discard it. The tablet did not reach professional archaeologists until 2006, when a team led by Carmen Rodriguez Martinez and Ponciano Ortiz Ceballos of Mexico's Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia formally documented and analyzed it. Their findings were published in Science magazine on September 15, 2006, one of the most selective peer-reviewed journals in the world, announcing the tablet as the oldest known writing in the Western Hemisphere by approximately 400 years. The block measures approximately 36 centimeters long, 21 centimeters wide, and 13 centimeters thick, and is carved from serpentinite, a greenish stone with significant symbolic weight in Mesoamerican cultures, associated with water, fertility, and the supernatural. The 62 symbols carved into its surface include 28 distinct sign types, several of which appear multiple times in what the 2006 Science paper describes as patterned distribution, a key technical indicator that distinguishes script from decorative carving. Signs that recur in variable combinations, following structural rules of some kind, are exhibiting the basic behavior of a writing system. The Cascajal block's signs do this, but what rules they follow and what they mean remains completely unknown. The surface of the block shows evidence of erasure and recarving. Signs were apparently removed and new signs inscribed over the smooth surface, suggesting the block was used as a working document rather than a purely ceremonial object. Someone worked with this tablet. They changed their mind about parts of it. They revised it. It functioned. The associated ceramics at the Cascajal site match the San Lorenzo phase of Olmec occupation, dating to approximately 900 BCE. San Lorenzo itself was one of the earliest and largest urban centers in the Americas, a city potentially supporting tens of thousands of people during its peak occupation between approximately 1500 and 900 BCE. Several signs on the Cascajal block appear to share visual elements with known Olmec iconography, including possible representations of corn, insects, and ritual implements. But whether these are logographic representations of those objects or purely phonetic signs whose visual form is coincidental to their sound value is entirely unknown. The Olmec themselves are the foundational problem underlying the Cascajal block. The civilization that appears to have influenced every subsequent Mesoamerican culture, providing apparent precursors for the Maya calendar, the Mesoamerican ballgame, urban planning conventions, and possibly writing traditions, yet whose language, origins, and fate remain almost completely undocumented. Their civilization declined around 400 BCE, and they do not appear by name in the oral traditions of any later culture as explicitly acknowledged ancestors. No other confirmed Cascajal-style script tablets have been found in the quarter century since the block's discovery, despite intensive archaeological surveying of Olmec sites across Veracruz and Tabasco. Verify current survey status. This single object may represent the entire surviving written corpus of the Western Hemisphere's founding civilization, the way a single page, torn from a library, represents everything that library ever held. Most archaeologists accept the Cascajal block as a genuine Olmec inscription and interpret it as a ritual or elite administrative document, possibly a list of names, a tribute record, or a ceremonial text associated with Olmec state religion. Some researchers have proposed that the Olmec script did not die, but transformed, that later Zapotec and Epi-Olmec writing systems, both partially deciphered, are evolutionary descendants of whatever the Cascajal block represents. If true, the block is the earliest known ancestor of an entire New World literary tradition. But even the partial decipherment of those later systems has not unlocked the Cascajal signs. You can read some of the children. The parent remains silent. Could the deliberate erasure of signs on the block's surface reveal something about what the Olmec considered worth revising or concealing if higher resolution imaging were applied to the erased areas? Is the Cascajal script the ancestral root of later Mesoamerican writing systems, or an evolutionary dead end that left no descendants at all? And are there additional Cascajal-style inscriptions somewhere in unexcavated Olmec sites or undisclosed private collections? The Cascajal block is unique. One tablet and one writing system, one civilization. But uniqueness in ancient writing is rarer than it sounds. In the Mediterranean, on an island that produced one of antiquity's most brilliant civilizations, there is an object so singular that scholars coined a specific term for its situation: a text corpus of one. Phaistos disc. On July 3, 1908, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier was excavating the basement storerooms of the Minoan Palace at Phaistos in southern Crete when he pulled a clay disc out of the ground and realized he was holding something with no parallel anywhere in the ancient world. A disc stamped with 45 distinct symbols, arranged in a spiral. No other object like it has ever been found. More than a century later, no one knows who made it, where it came from, what it says, or whether a second one ever existed. The Phaistos disc measures 15.8 centimeters in diameter, between 1 and 2.1 centimeters in thickness, and is impressed on both sides with 241 tokens, comprising 45 distinct sign types, arranged in clockwise spirals from the edge to the center. Side A contains 123 tokens in 31 groups. Side B contains 118 tokens in 30 groups. The signs were not carved or painted, but applied using pre-made stamps, individual tools created for each of the 45 sign types, pressed into wet clay before firing. This makes the Phaistos disk potentially the earliest known example of movable type printing technology in the world, produced roughly 3,000 years before Gutenberg. Someone made 45 individual stamps. Someone planned a printing system, and then apparently used it once. The disk was found in a small basement cubicle alongside pottery and a linear A tablet, which provided the initial dating context. The thermoluminescence dating of the disk as clay has been attempted, but produced inconclusive results due to the fired nature of the object. Contextual pottery analysis places it within the period approximately 1700 to 1600 BCE, during the Middle Minoan III period of Cretan civilization. Verify thermoluminescence attempt. The signs include human figures, birds, egregies in walking man, a helmeted head, a ship, fish, plants, and geometric forms, making the disk far more iconographically diverse than would be expected in a simple administrative accounting text. This diversity suggests either a rich pictographic vocabulary or a mixed logographic and phonetic system, but the content, purpose, and meaning of the inscription remain entirely unknown. The signs on the disk match no known writing system. They are not Linear A, the undeciphered Minoan script. They are not Linear B, the Mycenaean Greek script deciphered by Michael Ventris in 1952. They are not Egyptian hieroglyphics, not any Aegean script, not any Near Eastern system. In 2008, Jerome Eisenberg published a detailed argument in Minerva magazine claiming the disk was a modern forgery planted by Pernier himself. Saw a claim that most Minoan specialists have rejected but have not been able to entirely dismiss, because the disk's uniqueness makes independent verification through comparison to other objects impossible. Verify Eisenberg's specific claims. Gareth Owens of the Hellenic Mediterranean University and John Coleman of Oxford announced in 2014 that they had tentatively identified one repeated phrase on the disk as possibly meaning pregnant mother or goddess, framing it as a religious hymn. Their proposed decipherment has not achieved acceptance in the field. Verify researchers' institutions. The mainstream view accepts the disk as a genuine Minoan artifact, probably a religious, ritual, or administrative document of significant importance. Decipherment is considered essentially impossible without additional examples of the script, because you cannot establish phonetic values of signs without either a bilingual text or a statistically meaningful corpus of related inscriptions. But the stamping technology is the detail that resists the mainstream framing. Creating 45 individual stamps requires planning, craft specialization, and the clear intention to produce more than one document. Stamps are made for volume. The stamps imply a printing system. A printing system implies a library. We have one page. Where are the other pages? Some researchers have proposed the disk was an import, manufactured in a completely different Bronze Age writing culture and brought to Phaistos through trade or diplomacy, which would explain why its script has no parallel on Crete. If true, there was a literate civilization somewhere in the Bronze Age Mediterranean that produced stamped clay documents and has left no other trace. Others suggest it may not encode language at all, but function as a game board or ritual calendar. The sign groupings make this interpretation difficult to sustain, but in the absence of a second disk, the question cannot be closed. If the stamps imply a larger production system, why has not a single additional stamped document been found anywhere in the Mediterranean in over a century of intensive archaeology? If the disk was imported, from where, and what happened to the civilization that made it? And could the disk be a forgery? And if Pernier fabricated it, what source material did he use for the 45 signs? Because they correspond to nothing known. From the mystery of one disk in a Minoan palace, we travel north and inland to the highlands of southeastern Europe. Because in 1961, a Romanian archaeologist working in Transylvania found something under a burnt human skeleton that, if the dating is correct, changes the entire story of when civilization began to write. Tartaria tablets. In 1961, Nikolai Vlasa of the Cluj-Napoca History Museum was excavating a Neolithic site in Transylvania when he found a ritual pit containing burnt human bones, clay figurines, a shell bracelet, and 3 small clay tablets covered in incised symbols. When he dated the material around them, the number that came back stopped the academic world. Approximately 5300 BCE. 1,000 years before the Sumerians, who were supposed to have invented writing. And if the tablets are what they appear to be, the entire conventional timeline of civilization's origins has been wrong. The 3 Tartaria tablets consist of a rectangular tablet with incised animal and plant-like forms, and 2 round tablets, one with a central hole. The round tablets bear symbols, including what appears to be a pictograph resembling a goat and abstract marks, as well as symbols that researchers have identified as bearing visual similarity to early Sumerian proto-cuneiform signs, including one that some scholars have compared to the Sumerian sign for enclosure or administrative district. Verify sign identifications. The tablets were not fired before burial, meaning they are unfired clay preserved in their raw state. Some researchers interpret this as evidence of intentional ritual deposition rather than casual marking, suggesting the tablets were buried as sacred objects rather than discarded as debris. Radiocarbon dating of bone material found in the same pit produced dates of approximately 5300 BCE, placing the tablets within the Vinca culture, one of the largest prehistoric cultures in Europe, spanning roughly 5700 to 4500 BCE across the Balkans and Danube basin. The Vinca culture produced an extensive tradition of symbolic markings on pottery, figurines, and tools across a wide geographic area. And the Tartaria tablets represent the most dramatic concentration and apparent complexity within that tradition. A 2016 analysis by the Paleolithic Heritage Foundation examined over 5,000 Vinca symbols across southeastern Europe and identified 30 core symbols recurring with consistent contextual associations, which is one of the basic criteria used by researchers to distinguish genuine script from decorative, marking, verify organization, and study details. Maria Gimbutas, the Harvard-trained archaeologist and specialist in Balkan prehistory, argued in the 1970s and 80s that the Vinca symbol system represents a genuine writing system predating Mesopotamia, which she termed Old European script. Her position was contested sharply, and it has never achieved consensus acceptance. Greek archaeologist Demetrios Theocharis noted in the 1960s that several Vinca symbols have apparent parallels in Linear A, the undeciphered Minoan script, raising the possibility of a connection between Neolithic Balkan symbol systems and Bronze Age Aegean writing traditions that no one has fully traced. The mainstream position classifies the Tartaria tablets as evidence of symbolic or proto-writing, some marks with social or ritual significance that fall short of a fully functional writing system capable of encoding language. Most scholars accept that the Vinca culture used symbols for marking ownership, ritual identity, or social status, and that the visual similarities to Sumerian signs are coincidental, or the result of independent parallel development from shared visual archetypes, simple forms like crosses, lines, and enclosures that human symbol systems converge on naturally. But the coincidence hypothesis requires an accumulating number of coincidences. Researchers have identified not just isolated matching signs, but clusters of similar forms appearing in similar functional contexts across a geographic gap of thousands of kilometers and a chronological distance of potentially 1,000 years, with the Balkan examples being older. At what point does a pattern of coincidence become evidence of something else? And there is a detail that makes this question permanently unanswerable. Vlasa, the archaeologist who made the discovery, removed the bones from the tablets without fully preserving their stratigraphic relationship, destroying the most critical contextual evidence in the first moments of the find, before anyone understood what had been discovered. The key was broken before anyone tried to use it. Were the tablets genuinely contemporary, with the bones dated to 5300 BCE, or were they older objects placed in a later ritual context? Can modern clay isotope analysis of the tablets themselves, independent of the destroyed stratigraphic context, resolve the dating question? And if the Vinci symbols encode language, what language was it? And is there any surviving linguistic trace in the descendants of the peoples who used it? From Romania, we return to the Mediterranean, to an island whose brilliant Bronze Age civilization left behind hundreds of inscribed tablets in a writing system that has defeated every decipherment attempt for over 70 years, and whose failure to yield reveals something darker than mere technical difficulty. Linear A. Here is one of history's most pointed ironies. We can read Linear B, the Mycenaean Greek script used on Crete after approximately 1450 BCE. We can read it because Michael Ventris, a British architect with no formal linguistics training, cracked it in 1952. Linear B derived from Linear A. Linear A is older, more widespread, and the source script from which Linear B evolved. The child taught us to read. The parent remains completely silent, 70 years after the child's language was recovered. Linear A was first identified by Arthur Evans during his excavations at Knossos, beginning in 1900. Evans distinguished it from the earlier Cretan hieroglyphic script and the later Linear B, and published his initial findings in Scripta Minoa in 1909. So the script was clearly related to Linear B in visual form, using similar sign shapes and tablet formats, leading early researchers to assume decipherment would follow automatically once Linear B was cracked. When Ventris published his solution in 1952, the assumption was that Linear A would quickly follow. That assumption has proven catastrophically wrong. Approximately 1,500 Linear A inscriptions survive on clay tablets, stone libation vessels, gold and silver hairpins, pottery, and bronze tools, from over 55 Cretan sites and several Aegean island locations, including Thera, Melos, and Chia. The largest single collection, from the administrative center at Hagia Triada, contains over 150 tablets, which appear to be lists of commodities with quantities and possibly personal names. But the commodity words, the quantity units, and any names cannot be identified. Linear A contains approximately 56 to 61 signs in common with Linear B, whose phonetic values are known from Ventris's decipherment. In theory, applying those known values to the shared Linear A signs should produce readable text. In practice, applying Linear B phonetics to Linear A text produces syllable sequences that correspond to no known language. Yves Duhoux of the University of Louvain and Anna Morpurgo Davies conducted the most systematic quasi-bilingual analysis of Linear A in the 1980s and 1990s, comparing the resulting phonetic sequences against every known ancient language of the Mediterranean and Near East, including Semitic languages, Hurrian, Hattic, Luwian, and Etruscan, without producing consistent, recognizable vocabulary in any of them. Their conclusion was that the Minoan language is a genuine linguistic isolate related to no known language family. Verify specific publication. If this is correct, there is no comparative linguistic approach that can unlock Linear A because the language it encodes has no surviving relatives anywhere on Earth. Linear A appears on gold and silver votive objects, as well as on stone offering tables found at peak sanctuaries across Crete, in addition to administrative tablets, suggesting it encoded both religious and administrative content across the full range of Minoan literate activity. The volcanic eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, destroyed the settlement of Akrotiri around 1600 BCE, date actively debated by specialists, preserving several Linear A inscriptions under volcanic ash in conditions comparable to Pompeii. Verify date range. Even these perfectly preserved inscriptions cannot be read. Linear A was used for approximately 350 years before being abruptly replaced by Linear B around 1450 BCE, coinciding with what appears to be a Mycenaean Greek takeover of Crete. The replacement was rapid and apparently complete, with no known transitional administrative documents combining both scripts. Most scholars accept that Linear A encodes the Minoan language and that this language is a complete isolate with no known relatives. Decipherment is considered effectively impossible without a bilingual text or a major advance in computational comparative linguistics applied to unknown languages. But the speed and completeness of Linear A's replacement deserves examination. When the Mycenaeans took administrative control of Crete, they did not adapt Linear A to write their own Greek language, which they could have done. They introduced Linear B, a new system derived from Linear A's forms, but repurposed for Greek phonology. The Minoan language, as far as we can determine, disappeared from the written record almost immediately. No transitional texts, no Minoan Greek bilingual administrative documents. The voice of an entire civilization simply stops. Some researchers have asked whether that speed looks less like natural language replacement and more like deliberate administrative purging. Whether the Minoans left any texts in their own language after 1450 BCE that haven't been found, or whether their words were effectively stopped. Is Minoan truly a language isolate, or have comparative attempts simply not yet identified the right language family to compare it against? Given that genetic evidence for Minoan population origins points toward Neolithic Anatolian farmers, could there be a linguistic connection to Anatolian language families that linguists haven't yet established? And were there Linear A texts on perishable materials, like papyrus or wood, that would have vastly expanded the corpus, but have simply not survived the millennia? Linear A represents one civilization's vanished voice, but the next text doesn't represent one palace, one island, one civilization. It represents one of the largest ancient civilizations ever to exist on Earth, and we cannot read a single thing any of them ever wrote. Indus Valley script. 5 million people. Cities with underground sewage systems and indoor plumbing more than 4,000 years ago. Standardized brick sizes used across an entire subcontinent. Grid-planned streets. Public gathering pools. Multi-story buildings. Trade networks reaching Mesopotamia and Central Asia, and not one word of what they wrote has ever been read. Not one name, not one number, not one prayer, not one law. The Indus Valley civilization left over 4,000 written objects. Humanity has been staring at them in silence for 100 years. The Indus Valley script was first recognized during excavations at Harappa in modern Pakistan by John Marshall of the Archaeological Survey of India, beginning in 1921 and 1922. Discoveries at Mohenjo-Daro followed shortly after, revealing a civilization of extraordinary sophistication that had existed entirely unknown to modern scholarship. Script examples appear primarily on small square stamp seals used to mark goods, as well as on pottery, bronze tools, and terracotta tablets. More than 4,200 inscribed objects have been cataloged, featuring approximately 400 to 600 distinct signs, depending on the analytical methodology applied to the corpus. The disagreement about sign count is itself diagnostic. Researchers looking at the same inscriptions reach different conclusions about what constitutes a distinct sign and what constitutes a variant, which means the most fundamental descriptive work remains contested after a century of study. The civilization occupied approximately 1 million square kilometers, larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. At their peak, the cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa each supported estimated populations of 30,000 to 50,000 people, making them among the largest urban centers in the ancient world. The total civilization population estimate of 5 million exceeds contemporary Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet the average Indus inscription is only 5 signs long, making statistical analysis of the corpus extremely difficult and raising a genuine structural problem. Are these complete texts, or are they abbreviated markers, ownership signs, category labels, abbreviated names? Without knowing whether these represent full statements or fragments, Interpreting their structure is nearly impossible. Asko Parpola of the University of Helsinki has spent over 50 years attempting to decipher the Indus script and has published a comprehensive proposed decipherment arguing that the language is Proto-Dravidian, the ancestor of Tamil and related South Indian languages. His work is widely respected for its scholarly rigor and depth. It has not achieved consensus acceptance because it cannot be independently verified against a bilingual text or confirmed through linguistic comparison to a known descendant. In 2004, a team including Steve Farmer, then affiliated with Independent Research, Richard Sproat of the University of Illinois, and Michael Witzel of Harvard published a paper arguing that the Indus script is not writing at all, but a system of political and religious symbols, comparable to heraldry, that never encoded language. This non-writing thesis was immediately contested by Parpola and others, and remains deeply controversial, but it has never been definitively refuted. Verify affiliations and publication details. Dholavira, an Indus city in modern Gujarat, India, contains what may be the largest single Indus script inscription ever found, a signboard of 10 large signs, each approximately 37 centimeters tall, apparently once mounted above a city gateway. A sign above a gate in a script no one can read, marking a city whose name we don't know, in a civilization whose language has no confirmed descendants. Verify sign count and measurements. The Indus civilization declined and largely abandoned its urban centers between 1900 and 1700 BCE, possibly due to climate change and monsoon disruption, and the script disappears from the record simultaneously, with no transition to any later writing system in South Asia. Most scholars accept the Indus script as a genuine writing system, likely encoding an early Dravidian language, and consider decipherment extremely difficult due to short inscription length, the absence of a bilingual text, and the gap between the script's disappearance and the emergence of identifiable Dravidian languages in the historical record. But the non-writing hypothesis, even if ultimately rejected, forces a question that mainstream decipherment attempts haven't fully answered. What if the most sophisticated civilization of the ancient world, one with standardized weights, grid planning, and continental trade, deliberately chose not to encode spoken language in text? What if the Indus script is not a failed attempt to communicate, but a fully functional system that operates on different principles from everything we recognize as writing? And what does it mean that we genuinely cannot tell the difference? That we cannot determine, after a century of effort by some of the world's finest linguists, whether we are looking at language encoded in signs or something else entirely? Is the Indus script actually writing in the linguistic sense, or does it represent a category of information encoding for which we don't yet have an adequate framework? The Mesopotamian records of trade with a place called Meluha, widely identified as the Indus region, mention Meluhan merchants living in Mesopotamian cities. Did any of them leave Indus script inscriptions in Mesopotamia that have been overlooked? And why does the script disappear without any transition when the urban civilization declines? Was the literate class so small, so concentrated in urban centers, that when the cities emptied, the knowledge simply had no one left to carry it? Every text we've examined so far is unread because the code hasn't been cracked. But the next item is different. It has been translated. Every word of it has been published. You can read it in English right now, and it is still functionally completely inaccessible because it describes buried treasure worth billions of dollars hidden in 64 locations, and no one has found any of it. Copper Scroll. In March of 1952, archaeologists excavating Cave 3 at Qumran on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea found something that did not belong with the other Dead Sea Scrolls. Not scripture, not commentary, not hymns or prophecy. A scroll made not of parchment or papyrus, but of pure copper, rolled up, heavily oxidized, too brittle to unroll without destroying it. It was sent to Manchester College of Technology, where John Allegro arranged for it to be cut into 23 strips using a circular saw in 1955 and 1956. When scholars finally read it, they found a list. 64 locations, enormous quantities of buried gold, silver, and sacred treasure. The scroll has been translated. The treasure has never been found. The copper scroll, officially designated 3Q15 in the Dead Sea Scrolls catalog, is approximately 2.4 meters long when unrolled, engraved across 12 columns on copper, sheets approximately 1 millimeter thick. Its material alone is extraordinary. Copper was expensive in antiquity, and writing on it was essentially unknown as a practice, which means whoever commissioned this object considered its contents important enough to warrant extraordinary preservation measures. The text is written in Mishnaic Hebrew, a colloquial form distinct from the formal biblical Hebrew of every other Dead Sea Scroll, leading some scholars to argue it was produced by a different community entirely, not by the Qumran sectarians commonly identified as Essenes. Calculations based on the quantities listed in the scroll, using ancient Jewish measurement units, produce estimates of approximately 65 tons of silver and 26 tons of gold, along with consecrated vessels and additional scrolls. Mo verify specific tonnage calculations, which vary by scholar. At current commodity prices, the physical metals alone would represent a sum in the billions of dollars. The mainstream scholarly response to these numbers is not to dismiss them, but to accept them. Most Dead Sea Scrolls specialists now consider the treasure real, probably sacred temple vessels and treasury assets hidden by Jewish priests or administrators in the years leading up to, or during, the Roman siege of Jerusalem between 66 and 70 CE. The treasure was hidden. The scroll was a record. The hiding made sense, and the record made sense. The problem is that the location descriptions reference a landscape that no longer exists in a recognizable form. Al Wolters of Redeemer University College published a comprehensive analysis in 1996, arguing that Greek letters interspersed throughout the scroll, appearing after many of the 64 location descriptions, are not transliterations of location names but coded references, a second layer of encryption layered within an already cryptic document. Verify Wolters' publication. If he is correct, the copper scroll operates on two simultaneous levels of encoding, neither of which has been successfully resolved. Vendell Jones, a Texas archaeologist who spent decades searching for the copper scroll treasure in the Judean wilderness, died in 2010 without finding it, despite several high-profile claimed near discoveries. Verify claim about Indiana Jones' inspiration widely disputed. The mainstream view holds that the location names simply refer to places as they were known in 1st century CE Judea, a landscape that has been built over, renamed, and transformed by 2,000 years of continuous occupation, warfare, and construction. The names are readable. The territory they describe has vanished. But the scroll's final entry introduces a different order of problem. After listing 63 caches of physical treasure, Entry 64 describes another document, a companion scroll that would clarify all the location descriptions, and that was buried separately. This companion has never been found. The copper scroll was never designed to be used alone. It is an inventory whose companion was the key. Finding the inventory without the key is like finding a map legend without the map. And the possibility that sits beneath all the treasure hunting is this. What if someone already found the companion scroll? What if the copper scroll's locations were accessed long ago, the treasure removed, and the companion destroyed or concealed, leaving the inventory scroll in the cave as an artifact whose function had already been completed? Has the companion scroll referenced in Entry 64 been found and suppressed? Or does it remain undiscovered somewhere in the Judean wilderness? Do the Greek letter codes distributed throughout the copper scroll represent a fully worked out secondary system that, if decoded, would make the location descriptions legible even without the companion. And if 65 tons of silver and 26 tons of gold were actually hidden in 64 locations. Across first-century Judea, how has 2,000 years of continuous occupation, construction, archaeological excavation, and warfare not accidentally uncovered even a single one of the caches? From a text that has been translated but cannot be used, we arrive at the text that made all translation possible. Because somewhere in the Egyptian desert, on a limestone cliff wall in a remote gorge that travelers named the Gulch of Terror, someone carved the first letters in the history of the Western world, and most of what they wrote has never been fully read. Voynich manuscript. Somewhere in the early 1400s, someone sat down and wrote a book that no human being has been able to read in over 600 years. Not professional cryptographers, not computational linguists, not the codebreakers of the National Security Agency. See who declassified 2 separate internal studies of this manuscript in 2002, both produced by Cold War-era professional analysts, both concluding that the manuscript resisted every known decipherment technique available to the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in the world. The book still exists. You can view a facsimile of it today, and every single page remains completely, utterly, impenetrably silent. The modern history of the Voynich manuscript begins in 1912, when Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish antiquarian book dealer, purchased it from the Jesuit Collegio Romano in Frascati, Italy. Among the accompanying papers was a 1666 letter from Bohemian scholar Johannes Marcus Marci to Athanasius Kircher in Rome, claiming the manuscript had once belonged to Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, Waas, who reportedly paid 600 gold ducats for it, equivalent to roughly $100,000 today. Before Rudolph, the trail disappears. The manuscript contains 240 pages of flowing, confident handwritten text in a completely unknown script, illustrating plants that don't exist, astronomical systems that don't match any known sky, and biological diagrams of nude women bathing in green liquid connected by organic tubes, none of which correspond to any known medieval or ancient botanical, medical, alchemical, or astronomical tradition. Radiocarbon dating conducted by the University of Arizona in 2009 places the vellum's creation between 1404 and 1438 CE, firmly in the early 15th century, though the ink has not been independently dated and could theoretically have been applied to older vellum. Verify exact lab. The manuscript contains approximately 170,000 individual characters and 37 distinct sections, organized into what appear to be botanical, astronomical, biological, cosmological, pharmaceutical, and recipe categories, though none of these interpretations have been confirmed because none of the content has been read. Statistical analyses performed by linguist Gordon Rugg of Keele University in 2004 suggested the text could have been generated using a cardan grill, a 16th century encryption device, potentially supporting a hoax interpretation. But Rugg's analysis was subsequently challenged by researchers who demonstrated that the Voynich text has statistical properties inconsistent with the random generation a cardan grill would produce. In 2013, a study by Marcello Montemuro of the University of Manchester and Damien Zanet found that the Voynich text follows Zipf's law, the statistical pattern that governs the word frequency distribution of every known human language. He's suggesting it is not random noise and may encode genuine semantic content. In 2017, computer scientist Greg Kondrak of the University of Alberta used algorithmic language analysis to conclude with 49% confidence that the manuscript is written in Hebrew using an anagrammatic encoding. But when the proposed decryption was applied, the resulting text produced nonsense. Verify confidence figure. The manuscript contains at least 35 plant illustrations depicting species that have never been identified, not extinct plants, not stylized approximations of real plants, but botanical forms combining features from multiple real species in ways that produce anatomically impossible hybrids. The pages show heavy use. Edges are dirty in ways consistent with repeated handling, suggesting the manuscript was actively consulted, not merely stored or displayed. Someone was reading it, or believed they were reading it, or needed others to believe it was readable. The mainstream response to the Voynich manuscript falls into two positions. Either it is an elaborate hoax, a meaningless text designed to extract money from credulous Renaissance buyers like Rudolph II, or it is a genuine encrypted text whose cipher system was lost with whoever created it. The hoax theory gained significant support from Rugg's 2004 analysis, with proponents arguing that a sophisticated forger could have produced sufficiently language-like nonsense using period encryption tools. But the hoax theory creates its own impossibility. The statistical properties of the Voynich text, including entropy levels, word frequency distributions, and apparent grammatical structures, are extraordinarily difficult to fake manually in the 15th century without access to modern computational understanding of what language statistics look like. If a forger created the text, that forger was sophisticated enough to fake linguistic properties that would not be formally understood by science for another 500 years. And the plants, the astronomical diagrams, the biological illustrations, they depict things that don't exist in any system available to a medieval faker. Not real plants distorted, not real constellations rearranged. Things that have no counterpart anywhere in the record of human knowledge before or after the manuscript's creation. Some researchers have proposed the manuscript represents a completely lost natural language, a linguistic isolate with no surviving relatives, encoded additionally in cipher. Others have suggested it may be a constructed or artificial language, created for spiritual or esoteric purposes by a thinker whose entire intellectual system died with them. The question that inhabits every serious researcher who has spent time with this manuscript is simple. If someone wrote it fluently and confidently across 240 pages, covering the full range of human knowledge domains, from botany to astronomy to medicine to cosmology, who was reading it? What community was it written for? What did they believe they were learning when they turned these pages? If the text follows the statistical laws of human language so precisely that a computer identifies it as language, why has no decipherment attempt produced even partial coherent meaning from even a single page? Do the 17 missing pages from the manuscript contain something, perhaps a key, a table of correspondences, a glossary, that would unlock the rest, and were they removed deliberately? And the question that is perhaps the most unsettling of all, if someone wrote this as a hoax, who were they actually trying to fool? Because the people who have spent their careers on this manuscript, the cryptographers, the linguists, the AI systems, are not easily fooled. And none of them have gotten anywhere. These are not isolated puzzles. Across 6 continents and 6,000 years, the 10 texts in this list were each created by people who believed their words needed to outlast them. They wrote on copper and clay, on driftwood and stone, on limestone cliff walls and vellum pages. They pressed signs into wet earth and stamped symbols into fired clay. They organized their inscriptions into spirals and grids and baustrophodon lines that required their readers to turn the object in their hands with every line, a physical act of engagement that implies a relationship between reader and text. And in every case, through catastrophe, conquest, enslavement, erosion, deliberate suppression, and simple time, the physical objects survived, while the meaning they encoded did not. The mainstream position, held cautiously and with genuine intellectual honesty by most researchers in these fields, is one of guarded optimism. These scripts are technical problems awaiting better tools, more data, or the right lucky discovery. A bilingual tablet, a computational breakthrough, a surviving linguistic descendant no one has yet connected to the right script. History has produced miracle decipherments before. Egyptian hieroglyphics were unreadable until Napoleon's soldiers found the Rosetta Stone. Linear B was considered impenetrable until a young British architect cracked it in his spare time. The tools available to 21st century scholars, from multispectral imaging to machine learning applied to unknown writing systems, are more powerful than anything previous generations had access to. The optimistic view is that these silences are temporary. The alternative view holds that some of these silences were not accidental. That knowledge was suppressed, erased, or made inaccessible by forces that had reasons to want it gone. Colonial slavers who killed the last Rongo Rongo readers before anyone recorded their knowledge. Empires that replaced one script with another completely rather than adapt the existing system as the Mycenaeans did on Crete. The priestly systems that kept writing restricted to small literate elites so concentrated in urban centers that a single generation of disruption could erase everything. The timeline of human literacy is not a smooth ascent. It is a record filled with catastrophic losses that happened fast, without warning, before anyone understood what was being destroyed. What these 10 texts collectively suggest is that the range of human thought, the depth of human systems for organizing and transmitting knowledge, is vastly wider than the conventional history of civilization acknowledges. We inherited a fraction of the past. The texts on this list are evidence not of primitive cultures struggling toward writing, but of sophisticated civilizations that had already arrived there, that had developed systems we haven't cracked, that recorded things we haven't read. The silence of these texts is not absence. It is the sound of everything that was known before we started paying attention. Most people walk through museum galleries and see curious objects behind glass. Ancient artifacts, interesting patterns, pretty shapes. You watch this far. You know what the silence means. You understand what is actually there. This channel exists for people who refuse to accept "we don't know" as a final answer. It's not a conclusion. It's the beginning of the right question. Subscribe if you want to keep asking them, and leave a comment below telling us which of these 10 silences unsettles you most and which one you think will be cracked first. We read everyone. Writing has always been humanity's refusal to disappear, the insistence that a thought mattered enough to survive the person who had it. Every text on this list was made by someone who believed that completely. The Minoan priest who pressed linear A into clay. The Olmec stonecutter who carved 62 symbols into serpentinite. The Semitic laborer who looked at Egyptian hieroglyphics and had the thought that changed the world. What if the sign could carry sound instead of image? And then walked to a limestone cliff in a desert gorge called the Gulch of Terror and proved it was possible. They all said the same thing in scripts we haven't learned to hear yet. We were here. We thought. We knew something. The oldest words ever written are still waiting to be read. Subscribe so you're here when we get closer to reading them.